Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube, and welcome to another whiteboard video where today I am going to talk about the importance of understanding the differences between nostalgia and that of history as it relates to the antiques and collectibles trade over the short term and over the long term. Now, this is going to be a very important lesson for a lot of you guys out there. And if you are one of the Timmies, Kimmies, or Poindexters that do not learn anything from this lesson, you are bound to repeat these mistakes. And if you are a speculator or an investor operating in the overall antiques and collectibles trade, and again, you don't understand what I'm going to be talking about today, it will be detrimental at some point to your financial health. So, without further ado, before we get into the crux of talking about nostalgia versus history, we have to do a quick review of the invisible forces that govern the entire antiques and collectibles trade. Now, believe it or not, I am a huge fan of Adam Smith. Adam Smith wrote the book, The Wealth of Nations. The Wealth of Nations sets up the argument for capitalism. In that particular book, he talks about the invisible hand, the free market system that pretty much allows capitalism, allows free markets, free economies to exist. Well, make no mistake, the antiques and collectibles trade, for the most part, is an unregulated market. There are invisible forces that are working behind the scenes that are really not invisible, if you know where to look, if you know how to analyze these markets, that pretty much pull every collecting category in the trade one way or another. Now, this is very important because in my opinion, in my assessment, there are three main forces that govern every collecting category out there that is still going strong in the year 2021. The first force that we are going to talk about is speculation. And if you are a fan of the Wall Street movies, Gordon Gekko, played by Michael Douglas, he has a saying where he says, "The mother of all evils is speculation." I agree with that 100%. Well, here's the thing that a lot of the Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters don't understand. I get a lot of nasty emails because I'm one of those evil investors that talks about how to make money over the short term and or the long term in the overall antiques and collectibles trade. And a lot of people, believe it or not, they don't like hearing about that. They would rather go watch one of those hype-driven channels that tell you if you buy these 5 comic books, or if you put all your money in these 5 sports cards, or these 5 Marvel trading cards, in 10, 20, 30 years, you're going to have enough money to buy a house, retire, live comfortably, and live out your last few remaining years traveling the world. This is not a hype-driven channel, guys. I take you inside the antiques and collectibles trade, and I teach it to you the same way that it was taught to me. And I teach you how to be successful over the short term and or over the long term in these markets. Now, going back to speculation, every now and then, I'll get an email from a Timmy who states, "Shawn, you don't understand. I'm not trying to invest in these markets. I want these markets to be at the lowest price point possible so I can just reconnect with the items that I have a passion for." Now, fair enough. I'm a collector. I can understand that. As a matter of fact, I have empathy for you. The problem that you don't understand, though, is if you are of that mindset, if we remove speculation from all of these top-tier collecting categories, and I would say to you, you know what, we're going to remove speculation, we're going to move the evil investors from that collecting category. Are you aware the market would collapse? It would be a dying collecting category. That's what a lot of the Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters do not understand. The reason why a lot of these markets, whether we look at comic books, coins, paper money, vintage toys, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, sneakers, Lego, the reason why a lot of these markets are going strong, and some of them are going gangbusters in the year 2021, is because speculation exists in all forms, which attracts investors, dealers, auction houses, grading companies. Those particular individuals and companies provide the backbone to a lot of these collecting categories. Without them, the market will crash. If you don't believe me, call up a lot of top-tier auction houses today in the year 2021 and let me know how many of them are taking Lionel toy trains. How many of them are taking Pez dispensers? How many of them are taking Mark's toy play sets from the 1960s, 1950s? How many of them are taking Western-based toy collectibles? I guarantee you the answer is very few. Do you know why? There's no speculation in those markets because those markets are dying, or in some cases, I hate to say it, guys, they're already dead. Now, this leads us to the second force that pretty much works behind the scenes that governs the entire antiques and collectibles trade. That is fear and greed. Much like Wall Street, it's no different, guys. In the 1980s, you had Wall Street coming into the market with the advent of third-party grading and rare coins. They were greedy. That market was pretty much manipulated back in the 1980s. Well, it was manipulated. We know that. That's facts. However, in the year 2021, the market for rare coins is still going strong. You can invest in rare coins today. That market has a bright future. There's a lot of people, a lot of wealthy people, put their money in rare investment grade coins. Now, on the other side of the equation, in the 1990s, we saw a massive bubble appear in the aspect of Beanie Babies. Beanie Babies, that market was mass-produced. It utilized mass-produced scarcity. If you don't know what that means, go check out some of my other videos. I talk about mass-produced scarcity versus organic collectability in depth on this channel. While Beanie Babies, that market was being manipulated to get the Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters to believe it was going to become the next big thing. So a lot of people jumped headfirst into that market, and they started bidding up the price of these Beanie Babies. And it turns out most Beanie Babies were not rare. As a result, mass speculation entered that market. Over time, people realized that they were pretty much buying Fugazi. The market crashed within 6 to 8 years after its creation. And today, if you're going to invest in Beanie Babies, in most cases, I hate to say this, if you were trying to financially invest in Beanie Babies over the long term in the year 2021, you have a couple of screws loose in your head. Most likely you are a Timmy, a Kimmy, or a Poindexter, and you got an oversized head, or you have some other abnormality that medical science has not been able to figure out. If that is you, please let me know in the comment section below, because I do want to interact with people like that more, really. The people that do crazy stuff like that try to think that something is worth investing in simply because it was popular 20, 30, 40 years ago. Most of those people, in most cases, unless if they can actually state the facts as to what's happening in that collecting market, most of those people get wiped out because they don't know what they're doing. Beanie Babies, contrary to all the clickbait articles that you see on BuzzFeed and other internet news sites, are not coming back anytime soon. The question I do get asked, is it possible that that market could make a comeback? The answer is yes, if certain conditions exist. We'll get to that in another video. Right now, though, I'm not seeing those conditions being met. So in most cases, your Beanie Babies in the year 2021 and beyond are going to stay mostly worthless. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, as I already said, rare coins, even though that market was manipulated in the 1980s, that market is still going strong today. Why? Because there's a lot of organic collectability and also scarcity in that market. And here's a primer for what's to come in this video. Rare coins are also historic. That should be no secret to all of you out there. Now, this brings us to talking about the third invisible force that governs the antiques and collectibles trade. That, in my opinion, is the discussion of nostalgia versus history. And this is something that the Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters out there really need to listen to. So before we go any further, we're going to define the terms nostalgia and we're going to define the terms historic because it's very important for the rest of this video. So how do we define nostalgia? Nostalgia is simply defined as a sentimental longing or wistful attraction for the past, typically for a period, place, or time with positive personal associations. Now, this is a very strong feeling. This is why a lot of you guys develop emotional attachments to vintage toys or comic books or video games or whatever pop culture item you fancy. It could be Pokemon cards, it could be Magic the Gathering, it could be sneakers, it could be Lego. Make no mistake though, most of these items are rooted in pop culture. There are certain exceptions. Yes, you could have had a great uncle that collected rare coins and you remember him taking you to a coin convention, or maybe he gifted you a rare coin and to this day you have a strong nostalgic emotional attachment to that item. For the most part, however, emotional attachments and nostalgia are formed in our youth. For instance, personal story here. I remember I got very sick with mono when I was in 10th grade. And I was home from school for like a week. And throughout that week, all I did was play Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, TurboGrafx-16. Well, looking back at that time, I fondly remember a lot of those games that I played being sick in bed as a kid back in 10th grade when I got mono. Well, today, it makes no mistake, I have a strong emotional attachment to those items. Now, as somebody who is educated not only in business, economics, and finance, but also the antiques and collectibles trade, I recognize that I'm falling under the spell of nostalgia. Now, this is what you have to understand about nostalgia, and this is going to upset a lot of the Timmys, Kimmies, and Poindexters out there. Most of nostalgia is a lie to a certain degree. And I want to repeat that again. Most forms of nostalgia are a lie to a certain extent, simply due to the fact that we typically only remember and associate the feel-good memories of that time period without recalling any trauma or pain we may have been feeling at the time. For instance, when I think back to being sick in my bed for a full week with mono, to the point where I couldn't go to school, I couldn't go outside, all I could do is, if I had the energy, was play video games. I am associating my emotional attachment with the video games, not the illness. I am pretty much leaving out the fact that I was incredibly sick. I was under a doctor's care. I was on antibiotics and everything else trying to get better. Now, this is very important because if you recall, any of you out there that have a strong emotional attachment to any of these items, you do the same. I guarantee you, some of you went through severe trauma during the time period that you developed an emotional attachment to some of these collectibles, some of these items. Your brain disassociates from the trauma and you just remember all the good times. You have all the feel-good memories of those particular items, collectibles, or things that you have an emotional attachment to. This is very important. Now, on the other side of the equation, we talk about history. History is very important in the overall antiques and collectibles trade. Let me give you an example and a definition here. Basically, the term historic means having to do with a famous time frame, event, and or person associated with history. History does not require nostalgia to have meaning or importance, but nostalgia requires a personal connection to the past. Note the difference, guys. Nostalgia usually only lasts for a generation or two. Now, why is that important? And this is where we get to the crux of this video now that we're almost 13 minutes in. Nostalgia is fleeting. It is not replicatable. When somebody has an emotional attachment to video games or comic books or vintage toys or Pokemon cards or Magic the Gathering or sneakers or Lego, that is usually their own personal attachment that cannot be given to someone else. Meaning someone being born and growing up in the 2020s, 2030s, they're going to come to age in a particularly different time than somebody like me who came of age in the 1980s or the 1990s when I was laying in bed playing TurboGrafx-16 with mono because I couldn't go outside or couldn't go to school. This is very important. And this is why when you guys reach out to me and you say, Shawn, you don't understand. Atari was first. I love Atari. Therefore, everyone's going to love Atari. Somebody born in the year 2021 is not going to have that same nostalgia for Atari that you have. Somebody born in the year 2021 is going to associate comic books differently than somebody who was born in 1976 like me, or 1955 like somebody from the baby boomer generation. These are important nuances you have to understand if you are investing in collectibles and antiques over the long term. Now let's talk how this relates to history. I'm here to tell you firsthand, I collect rare coins, I collect paper money, i.e. currency, I collect first edition books, I collect edge weapons, I collect antique firearms, I collect historical documents, and I also collect certain pieces of art. Now, obviously, I'm not playing in the $100 million category here, guys. Let's be realistic. But where I'm going with this, I was not alive when Picasso created a painting. I was not alive when the Revolutionary War, when the Civil War, when World War I, when World War II were fought. I was not alive when most of the coins I have in my collection were minted. I was not alive when a lot of the paper money that I possess in my graded currency collection were pretty much printed. I was not alive when my all-time favorite book, The Great Gatsby, was penned by F. Scott Fitzgerald in the 1920s. These are all items that are historic, though, and items that I have some form of an attachment to, but I would not call it nostalgia. Now, what does this mean? On the short term in the antiques and collectibles trade, this is what collectors and unsophisticated speculators get wrong. Nostalgia is very important. In the long term, those of you that reach out to me and you tell me, Shawn, you don't care about anything I say, that copy of Super Mario Brothers that's factory sealed, a kid born in 2021 is definitely going to want it because it means the birth of Nintendo. If that's you, this video isn't going to help you. But overall, history is what matters over the long term. Now, there are caveats over here as well. For instance, if I poll my audience, how many of you have ever heard of Annie Oakley? How many of you know who Annie Oakley was? How many of you know who Buffalo Bill is? All these particular characters or people that I'm bringing up, they are historic. However, do people care about them in the year 2021? That also matters. F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, he's still relevant today. A lot of the collectors, a lot of the dealers that are propping up the value of rare coins, currency, edged weapons, firearms, those items have historical relevance to the year 2021. Now, I know a lot of you out there, you reach out to me, Shawn, I'm never going to collect art. I'm never going to collect historical documents. I'm never going to collect edged weapons or rare books or rare coins. I get it. But what you need to understand, if you are playing on the collectible side of the trade, you must understand that in most cases, younger generations are not going to look at this stuff the way that you do because your logic is clouded in nostalgia. And as a result, a lot of these markets are not going to be multi-generational. In fact, if you look at some of them, like Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, video games, comic books, we should be amazed that some of these markets are still going strong. Because I said this before, in the year 2021, little Timmy that pops out of his mother's womb, if he has the collecting gene, he grows up, he tries to invest in these markets, he is not going to associate the way that somebody does who was born in 1976 like me with video games, comic books, vintage toys, Pokemon cards, and the like. This is something that you must understand. For those of you that keep reaching out to me stating, Shawn, I'm buying all this stuff. I'm never going to sell it. It's all going to go up in value. It's going to exponentially increase because newer collectors are going to keep coming into these markets. Yeah, that could happen. That could happen for the next 30 to 40 years. I don't doubt that. Some of you guys that reach out to me, you're in your 20s or 30s, that could potentially happen. You are absolutely right. You could pretty much invest in Magic the Gathering, Pokemon cards, maybe some comic books and video games, and you could get lucky where the wave keeps going for the next several decades. But at some point, make no mistake, history is going to be more important than nostalgia. That is the lesson for today. Learn from this. If you have any questions, you want to see me do a follow-up video on this, let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. I hope you got something out of this. This was controversial to any of you Timmys, Kimmys, and Poindexters that are still watching, so I do expect some downvotes on this video. It's not to be unexpected, but I do hope that you at least understand what I am trying to convey when we talk about nostalgia versus history as it relates to the entire antiques and collectibles trade. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.